is Jamal Abdi. I'm the president of the National Iranian American Council. The Trump administration's decision to exit the deal is, I think, going to have lasting harm on the United States, our ability to utilize diplomacy as a tool to resolve international challenges. I think it sets up a confrontation with our allies, with Europe. I think it plays into the hands of China and Russia and actually gives them some significant leverage over the United States and over the West. I think it's going to be very difficult for Iran to muddle through this, and I think it poses a risk of Iran either making a decision to itself renege on the deal and potentially puts the nuclear challenge back on the table. I think it's also destabilizing for the region because it could invite such an Iranian response. It could invite other Iranian responses as well. And I think the biggest takeaway of all is that this decision, I think, puts the United States on a collision course with Iran and is I think, first step in a campaign that this administration is now undertaking aimed at, if not toppling the government in Iran, then destabilizing Iran. And I don't think there's really an end goal in place, but clearly this administration wants to turn Iran into some sort of failed state in order to weaken its presence in the region. The implications for the United States' economy, I think there may be longer term implications. If the Europeans and others really stand up to this decision and begin to put mechanisms in place that would be necessary to continue to uphold the deal and to continue to have economic ties with Iran, that would then require circumventing the U.S. financial system. It would require potentially putting bodies in place that would implement and monitor sanctions, sort of like OFAC does for the United States. And so what I think that does is it does sort of potentially undercut the United States' monopoly or dominance, at least, over financial channels in the financial sector as well as sanctions. And so I don't know how far Europe is going to go, but I think that this does weaken some of the United States' power in those regards. I also think it just, as far as U.S. security, I think it makes it extremely difficult for the U.S. to be to utilize diplomacy and to be an actor that other states, whether they are allies or adversaries, to be able to negotiate with, because we are no longer dependable. We are no longer necessarily can be considered a rational actor, especially if you take a step back. You don't know if the administration you're dealing with is going to be replaced by an administration that does the complete opposite. So I think signaling this sort of lack of consistency is just really damaging for the United States' ability to actually negotiate and do deals. And I think that is immensely damaging. We may not even see the effects, but I think that they will be lasting. They may be permanent. It's going to be really hard for the United States to actually command much respect and credibility because of this decision. I think Iran may change its behavior, but not in the direction that the United States is hoping for. By leaving this deal, the Trump administration has essentially validated those in Iran who oppose negotiating with the United States from the start, who have long argued that the only approach that the United States will understand is one of resistance and power projection by Iran. The Rouhani government sort of went out on a ledge, or in order to get this deal. experienced a lot of pushback from hardline elements inside of Iran who don't want to negotiate with the United States, who do not want to comply with international norms, do not want Iran's economy to be integrated into the global economy. And because of Trump's decision, those arguing for engagement lost, those arguing for resistance and a more provocative foreign policy for Iran, they have won. So we have empowered them, and I think that any changes we see from Iran will likely be shaped by that new dynamic. Unfortunately, you cannot put the Trump toothpaste back in the tube. I think the course of action is to immediately re-enter the nuclear deal and fully uphold it. But I think that that's out of the realm of possibility. In lieu of that, I think it's really important that the United States provide exemptions and waivers for countries and entities that continue to uphold the JCPOA, and hope that Iran is able to receive the benefit necessary to continue to uphold its own commitments and to not restart elements of its nuclear program. At this point, I think the only hope is that we're able to get through the midterms in November, that a majority is elected in Congress that will actually challenge Trump on some of these things, and that majority actually can take legislative action to ensure that European and other companies and entities are not sanctioned by the United States. I don't think that. I think the only hope here is that we avoid this antagonism of the United States sanctioning its allies and other parties to the deal. Bigger picture, I think a lot of this, a lot of the situation between the U.S. and Iran is really motivated less by U.S. interests and more about the interests of our regional allies. The Iran deal, in part, I think, was motivated by the understanding, at least by the last administration, that the United States could not solely depend on Israel and the Saudis and the Gulf states as its only partners in the region, and that this proxy war with Iran was undermining U.S. interests and exposing the United States to a lot of a need to invest lots of resources that were not necessarily beneficial. So I think that solving that problem actually means potentially the United States stepping out of the way and outsourcing this to some other party, potentially a party that's complying with the JCPOA, but really trying to push for some sort of beginning of a political process involving all of these parties in the Middle East, involving Iran and the Saudis and potentially even the Israelis, to start to figure out a way to come up with positive sum diplomacy where the interests of all parties are actually being addressed. Unless we can break out of this cycle, I think that we are headed towards more of these regional proxy wars with the U.S. weighing in on one side against the other, and this is inevitably on this course. It is going to lead to a wider conflagration and the United States being sucked into some all-out regional war in the Middle East. And I think that it's really imperative that policymakers in the United States realize this and take actions to stop it. Unfortunately, what I see now in the White House with John Bolton and Mike Pompeo is an interest in actually fanning those flames and working to actually further entrench the United States in the Middle East and sort of going all in against Iran, whatever the cost may be. All of the policies that we have seen really hit the Iranian American community are, I think, motivated by the U.S.-Iran relationship and the animus between the two. So whether it's the Muslim ban or the effect of sanctions that prevent Iranian Americans from being able to, receive inheritance from Iran or, sell property of family members, things like that. All of these things are policies that are motivated by the U.S. the animosity between the U.S. and Iran, and the U.S. attempting to put together policy initiatives aimed at pressuring Iran, but which in reality have less of an effect on the Iranian government, more of an effect on the Iranian people, but then also sort of tertiary effects on the Iranian diaspora worldwide as well as in the United States. So I unfortunately, I see this getting worse, and at least for Iranian Americans, this is really a time to both put our foot down and make sure that we're being protected and our civil rights are being protected, but then also trying to push for getting this relationship back in a place where there actually is diplomacy, and instead of the United States relying on blunt tools like sanctions and travel bans, that the United States actually has a diplomatic channel. The current situation, to some degree, has fostered some unity inside of Iran among the different factions, just because I think the country is now under duress, is under threat, and so I think to some degree there's unification, but there's also fierce domestic battles. You have the president's opponents working to undercut him, and even fanning some of these protests and things like that. But I really think that we haven't really seen the impact of this decision yet, and likely what this does is it potentially radicalizes the internal dynamics by putting Iran back into a sanctions economy. That really aids elements like the IRGC and others who are in control of smuggling networks and ports and things like that. But then also politically, I think the fact that the moderates in Iran have been so undercut by Trump's decision, I think it empowers hardline forces, and it also potentially really undercuts those in Iran who were pushing for this moderate track and who were pushing for a reform track. And it potentially could lead to a sort of a radicalization of the popular politics in Iran. And that's something that I think the United States and others may be seeking to actually do, to try to make it seem to Iranians that there are no options other than destabilization, and that the leaders of Iran just can't be worked with. And so, I mean, this whole thing may be part of some big strategy that those behind Trump actually have in mind, which is aimed at destabilizing Iran, and which actually, there are these elements who are now in the Trump administration who I think view the election of somebody like Rouhani, or in 2009 viewed the potential election of Mousavi, these reformers or moderates, as a threat, because the real goal for some of these folks who are in the United States, who are in Israel, who are in Saudi Arabia, is to weaken Iran, and if that means regime change or a failed state, then they'll take it. And so I think that this move actually serves those interests, because it could potentially lead to this radicalization of the politics inside of Iran, and no options but these very bad options. So I see this as it's going to be really negative for the dynamics inside of Iran. But we'll see. I don't know if the U.S. actually has a real strategy other than just this blunt instrument of put pressure on Iran. And if that's the case, if it's not part of this bigger strategy, I do think that there's also the potential of sort of a unification of the politics inside of Iran. But that, again, is not going to be something that serves the interests of those who want better relations between the U.S. and Iran, or Iran and the West. And it's going to be more of a return to this sort of resistance posture that Iran had under Ahmadinejad.